and I'm part of Children for Change. Children for Change is a club for kids, and we help the environment and the community. This is our first YO project, which stands for Younger and Older. We want to bring together younger and older generations. We appreciate your time, and we can't wait to learn more about you. How long have you lived in Marin?
Maybe 45 years.
Wow, I've only lived here for 11. What brought you to Marin?
When I first moved to California, I came over to Marin, and you had to take the ferry from Richmond over. And I just loved it, and I thought someday I'm going to live there.
What did you love about it?
Just everything.
Yeah, it's very pretty.
I grew up in Oregon, and so I liked open spaces, lots of trees, the water. Yeah, and I decided that somebody had run into my car and smashed it. So it was in the garage, and they gave me a loaner, and it was a convertible. So I came over to Marin, and I thought, I want to move there. And I drove up Highway 1, and I'd stop and ask, do you have anything for rent? And then I saw the sign to Bolinas, and I drove in there, and there was a dog asleep in the middle of the street. And I thought, okay, that sounds good. And I pulled up in front of a real estate office, and there was a man sitting on a bench there. And I just rolled down the window and said, do you have anything for rent under $100? And he said, yes. And I rented a cottage up on the mesa with a view of the ocean. And I had my 2 daughters with me. Well, not with me that day, but the man says, you can't make a decision that fast. I have to talk to your mother. And so I brought my mom over there, and he rented it to us for $75 a month. And so I lived there for over 20 years.
And you've lived here ever since?
Yeah, and then my family said that it was time for me to move closer to civilization and to grow up, is what they put it. And my girls had already gone through school and gone on their own things, and I'd been off adventuring, and they said, it's time you grew up. And so I came over and checked out senior places, and I liked the one in Fairfax. So I signed up, and I thought, well, okay, I've signed up now, I've done that, and but this is such a neat place, it'll probably be at least 2 years before I get a call, that there's a vacancy. And it was 2 months, and I wasn't mentally ready, but I couldn't turn it down. So I've been there 29 years now. And I'm glad I did. I chose Fairfax because it was as near to Bolinas as you could get. Small, and everything was there, and I knew I could walk to it, but now I can't walk that much, but that's okay.
Do you think if you could go back, you would go anywhere else, or would you stay here?
No, I'd stay here.
Yeah.
Once I moved into Bennett House, I said, this is it. This is where I'm going to be. I'm not going to move again.
Yeah.
I think I had done pretty much everything that was on my mind to do. And one of them was to drive to every state. And I did it.
Wow. It's a long drive.
And I worked at Denali National Park in Alaska for 7 summer seasons and drove up there 3 of the years. So yeah, I've got a pickup truck and I could sleep in the back of it and off I'd go.
How long did it take you to drive to every state?
From here to Alaska is 10 days on the road.
A long time.
Yeah, it's a long ways.
You slept in your truck?
Yeah.
Wow.
And because it's so big and so open, all through Canada it's open, it'd be like one fairly good-sized community at a day's end.
Yeah.
You know, and I'd sometimes it was pretty scary where I'd have to camp, but I'd try to be cautious. And, yeah.
So, did you like doing that, or would you ever want to, if you went back, would you do that again, if you could, or?
Oh, sure, I'd do it again.
Yeah, this must have been really fun.
Yeah,
I wish I could go to all those places.
Yeah, and people, when I would be driving across country, people would say, well, what was your favorite state? And I'd say, whatever one I'm in.
Yeah.
Because it's all different.
Mm-hmm.
And being here on the West Coast, there's mountains everywhere. You know, it's hard to find really flat land. And I got out in the middle of the country, and it was so flat. It was unbelievable. I pulled over and took pictures of it because I couldn't believe it was absolutely flat. And yeah, I enjoyed every place I went.
It's amazing. I've only been to
And I always went by myself because I didn't want to compromise.
Yeah.
I didn't travel on freeways. I traveled on country roads.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'd come to a fork in the road, I just said, well, I'll go that way. And just all kinds of villages and small towns. And yeah, I wouldn't have traded that for anything.
It's pretty cool. Did you ever feel lonely, though, because you were all alone?
No.
For that long time?
No. I was so eager to see new things and learn new things that my thoughts were all filled up. I never got lonesome, and people were always really nice. I could, if I wanted to visit, I'd stay 2 nights in a place, you know, and just start talking to people. So, no, that was good.
That's awesome. Did you always sleep in your truck, or did you ever go to someone's house to sleep or something?
No, I was always in the truck, except one time I was going to stay in a campground, and the man there said, there's a storm coming, you better get to a motel. And I did, and thank heavens, because it was a bad storm and the electricity went out, and so I was glad that he warned me off, and because the weather's different back there too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I go to Wade Thomas, and I'm in 5th grade, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit about your growing up. So where did you first grow up?
I grew up around Eugene, Oregon. My dad bought 5 acres of forest and built our house and the chicken house. And we did have, over the years, we had about 2,000 chickens, and he sold eggs. But our house had no running water, no plumbing, no electricity. And so we had a pump at the back door and kerosene lamps, and you went to bed when it got dark.
Yeah.
And the school was about 1.5 miles away, and we had to walk. In first grade, it was 2 rooms and outhouses, and then they changed it. They built another room on it and indoor plumbing. So I went to that school through 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And it was during the Depression, and we lost the property and had to move. And we moved clear across on the other side of Eugene, and but the house had indoor plumbing. So the first time I had indoor plumbing was in the 6th grade.
Wow. Did you like your new house?
Well, it was interesting, mm-hmm. but I really liked my old one.
Yeah.
And my sister and I, one time, we could see a path that went from the new house down to town and then out the other side. And we knew if we ran away from home that day, my mom would see us if we went on that path. So we detoured around, and we went through the town of Eugene and across the bridge of the Willamette River and went out to the old place. And we could hear somebody working in the woods, and we went back out there, and it was my girlfriend's father. And I don't think he was too happy because he had to drive us home. But home is home.
Yeah. Did you, what was your favorite part about your house growing up?
I think the freedom. My dad was in the Army, but he was also an outdoorsman. And he taught us how to be safe in the woods, how not to get lost. And in the spring, there would be lady slippers, little flowers that would grow, and they were like miniature orchids. Mm-hmm. And he would tell us, pinch the stem off because the bulb is, leave the bulb in the ground because it'll bloom again the next year. And they had such a sweet, sweet smell. Just a couple of them in the house would just make it smell really good.
Yeah, those are the best. How many kids or grandkids do you have?
Let's see, I have 7, I think. And I think 8 great-grandchildren.
And what did you love to do in high school?
In high school? Mm-hmm. I loved art and English. It's kind of a blur because I had 2 girlfriends, and one of them had a boyfriend that she'd given up on, and so she set it up for us to have a double date, and me with that guy. Mm-hmm. And we went roller skating, and eventually got married the day after I was 17. Mm-hmm. He was 19, but he had a job at a sawmill earning 37.5 cents an hour.
Well, what else did you really like did you have any special things that you like to do after school or in school?
I don't remember anything specific. I know my mom didn't expect us to help with anything. So I was pretty much to just roam around and be free. I like being with my girlfriends, but I also treasured the time I spent by myself.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any like pets other than your chickens?
We would have different pets.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave us a dog and a doghouse, which he wouldn't use. And one time I crawled into it, and then I couldn't get out. And so I didn't do that again. But
did someone get you out?
And one time he had cut down a tree, and he would gather us around and tell us the weather. We'd count how many rings were on the tree so we know how old it was. And when there were dry years, the rings were really close together. And when there were wet ones, the rings would be farther apart. So you could tell the weather cycles for 100 years back.
That's really cool. Did you, like, did you have any, like, special things you did with your friends?
Probably just laugh a lot. Oh, one of them, we ran away from home. And we decided we would go over to the coast and be waitresses. And we got into a house that was vacant and slept on the floor with no blankets, nothing. We didn't have anything with us. We just were going to go. And her dad tracked us down in the morning, and I was so glad. I guess she was too.
So you told us about having a pickup truck. How old were you when you got it?
I didn't learn to drive till I was in my 30s. But the pickup truck, my son was going with a girl in Santa Cruz, and she was into drugs and things, and he says, "Mom, you've got to come and help her." So I went down to Santa Cruz, and she was pretty pathetic, but she was from a rich family, and so I'd drive down there and try to take care of her, and finally I wrote to her father, and I said that I was willing to do it, but I needed some help from him. So he said, "Go pick out a car," and so I decided I wanted a truck, and it was a full-size Ford truck, so it was big. And but it wasn't a very good one. It was new, but it was the first year of production or something, and I drove it quite a long time, and then I got it, traded it in for another smaller one that I still have, which was an '88.
What were your favorite things to do with your siblings or your sister?
Well, as growing up, because I was the oldest, I was expected to set the example, so I wasn't very fond of the rest of them because I'd get in trouble if they'd get in trouble. And so once we were grown up and had kids of our own, we started going camping every year up on the Yuba River outside of Grass Valley. And it changed everything. We brought all our kids, and we connected, and the kids connected, which was a good thing because they still are connected.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the interview. And I'm going to pass on to Coda now. So, thank you again.
Hi, I'm Coda, and I'm a 5th grader at Wade Thomas, and I'm going to be asking you about your work in World War II. What does it mean to be called a Rosie the Riveter?
Well, it's kind of the name that got hung on us because of that poster. And there was a song, Rosie the Riveter. And actually, after the war, we just didn't think about it anymore. And then in the late 1990s, a Richmond City Councilwoman was running for re-election, and she was going door to door, and there were a lot of the women that she talked to that had worked in the shipyards. So she said, she put a notice in the newspaper and said if any of us had worked in the shipyards, write to her, and maybe we could get a recognition, a monument, or something. And so many people responded that in 5 years we had a national park. So she said they debated about what they should call it and decided that Rosie the Riveter Park. So that's what we got kind of stuck on. I've been working on getting a national holiday, but that's not going to happen. But in 2017, we got a National Rosie the Riveter Day. And at that point, I didn't care whether it was Rosie the Riveter or Women Workers of World War II, but they chose Rosie the Riveter. So now we're Rosies.
What was the most challenging part about working in the war?
Getting the job in the first place. And I signed up for welding school at Richmond High School, and they assigned me 4 to 8 in the morning because the class ran 24 hours a day. And when I'd been there 2 weeks, they said, okay, go into the hiring hall in Oakland. And I marched in there, and I went up to the window, and they said, nope.
Oh.
You've got to go to the Boilermakers Union. So I went over there, and this guy is sitting at a desk, you know, and he says, we don't take women or blacks, only he didn't use blacks. So I went home, and then I kept going back to the hiring hall, and one day I just burst out crying. And as I walked back to the hiring hall, a man at a table asked me what was wrong, and I told him, and he says, go back up there. And I don't know if I went to the same window, because there were different windows, but they hired me. And then they said, okay, now we have to wait for the union to let women in. So they hired 6 of us and waited, and the union came along, and it was July 1942 when they said it was okay. So Kaiser Shipyard hired a chaperone to take us out to the workplace because they had no idea how the men would react to us. But that went fine. The first day, oh, it was so noisy and smelly and confusing. But then as the time went on, my lead man would assign members of the crew what they wanted done. And I got what was left over, which was just little junky stuff. And so I thought, well, I probably know as much about welding as some of these guys they've got there. So this one morning, I just got in lockstep behind him, and every time he'd point, I'd say, I can do that. And so to get rid of me, he did. He said, okay, do it. And so I progressed from that to journeyman welder, and then Navy certified welder, which is high as you can get. And at the same time, I was getting the same pay with the guys. So I really loved it. It was hard work, but it was so satisfying. And as you do an arc weld, you make little crescents that overlap like fish scales.
That's cool.
And the women tended to do prettier welds because we'd done needlework and embroidery and things like that. So the guys, they'd do it, and their welds were good, but they were kind of sloppy. So.
Okay, what was your favorite part of being involved in that work?
For me, personally, it was the first time I'd ever had money of my own in my hand, that I had a feeling of being important, and of doing something that was totally satisfying. It destroyed my marriage because he couldn't handle the fact I was doing the same work he was for the same pay. But even with that, and then because I had a house in Richmond, family came from Oregon, and I had a small child. My son was 15 months old when I went to work. But my sister Marin came from Oregon to take care of him. And then she went to high school the next fall and met a sailor, and she got married too. But family members kept coming. So at one time there were 4 of us, me, and then my sister Marge became a welder too. Then Marion became a draftsman, and then my mom became a painter. So there were 4 of us women working in the shipyards at the same time.
What do you think the world needs most of right now? What do you think the world needs?
It's a big question, and not an easy answer.
There's a lot of answers.
But we need a change at the top, and if we could get the Senate and get some of the things done that need to be done, climate change, infrastructure, the healthcare things settled, that would be a start. But there's always going to be another problem.
Yeah.
But right now, it's a sad time. I work with Congress a lot, and my things don't get done because, well, like when the government was shut down, that wasn't necessary. It hurt a lot of people. I think we all have to be hopeful of the future and help.
So I see you have a lot of pins on your jacket. Could you point out some special ones?
Let's see, I've forgotten what I have on what side. Well, this badge, and then this pin, Vice President Joe Biden gave me that one.
That's so cool.
And then this one, I think that's the CIA pin. And this was Cape Canaveral. But this one means a lot because I was in Sacramento, and a group of us were there, and the Congress was in session. And so we're standing at the back of the room, and a big tall man came up that was an assemblyman. He took this off of his coat and pinned it on me.
That's so cool.
And that means a lot.
That's so cool.
And then over here is my wherever it is. Yeah, shipyard badge.
Mm-hmm.
And these are old pins that, well, this one is from the Boilermakers, but these are old pins that were from that time period.
Mm-hmm.
So they mean a lot. And then just different.
That's so cool. Well, I think Kate's gonna come in and get to know you a little more, too.
Okay.
Yes.
So, what do you do for fun?
What do I do now for fun? Well, mostly I'm trying to organize all my papers and things. It's fun, but I have short-term memory loss, so it's really funny sometimes because I'll go through a bunch of papers and then later I want one of those, and then I can't remember where I put it. So now I write everything I put in a container. There isn't much that well, I guess I read a lot at night, and I just enjoy being.
What's your favorite book?
I have an author that I like, B.J. Daniels. She writes sort of Western, sort of romance, sort of mysteries in Montana. And I started reading her stories because I have a daughter that lives in Montana. And the first book I got of hers was in the area where my daughter lived. And I really enjoy her writing. And she'll write a series of books that carry a story through. I just finished one that was 5 books, and it was just a continuing story of a family. Yeah, so I enjoy that. And when I have time, I try to do craft things. And these are what I made last year for Christmas gifts. And haven't quite decided what I'm going to do next year, but I'm gathering ideas. And
They're super cool. So we were told that you visited the White House. What was that like?
That was the adventure of a lifetime. I had been writing to different presidents since Clinton was president, and no answers. And I'd written to Obama, I don't know how many times, and I'd written to his wife, and no answers. And I told my sister, well, I'm going to write one more letter. I'll write it to Biden. And by then I knew that they had the mailroom, and it took a while to get through that. But I thought I would get so ridiculous that they'd read it, you know.
Yeah.
So the letter I wrote to Biden was that we needed to be recognized for what we did. I don't know the total number of women that worked in defense, but the number goes from 16 million to 6 million women, and the government really recruited women to work because they needed us.
Yeah.
And so here's all these monuments and whatever to the military, nothing about the women. And so I wrote and told him that we needed to be recognized, and that, but we couldn't come to D.C. unless we were invited. So I said my fantasy was to have my picture taken in the Oval Office with the two of them. And I wanted a big hug, a big Biden hug. Well, I wrote it in May, and nothing happened. And then in October, I got a phone call from his office, and so they set up a time the next day that he was going to call me, which he did, and invited us, and there was 5 of us. So he said we had to raise our own money, so I said it was too close to Christmas, so we couldn't come right away. And he said, well, just pick a time. So I picked April, and so we had time to raise the money to go, and that was good and bad, because we had to have that number, that tax-free number thing, and we got kind of messed up in that. But when we got, well, then he called me again the night before we flew to D.C., and he said everybody was looking forward to seeing us, and he had a lot of surprises. Well, did he ever? And the first place he sent us was to the Pentagon. And so we got a tour of the Pentagon, and then we went up to the Secretary of Defense, and then we went to the White House and had lunch in the dining room in the West Wing. And Michelle Obama wasn't there, but her chief of staff was. So cool. And so when we got through with that, we went into another room, and there's the crew of Good Morning America. And so we didn't know all this was going to happen. So we walk in, and then Biden comes in, and he says, "Where's Phyllis?" Got my big hug. And then it begins to get kind of vague, because it was just too much. You know, we got a tour of the White House, and we had, he had a big office there, which I have no memory of being in at all, but pictures show I was there. And then we went into the Oval Office, and I don't remember walking into there. I was just like, I was just all of a sudden there, and it was just, you know, just amazing. So I got my picture, and then we each had helpers, because there's so much walking. We all had wheelchairs, and so he invited everybody in, and they got their pictures too. We were sitting at a table with Biden, and we didn't know we were going to meet Obama. Oh. So we're talking, and a door opens at the side, and he pokes his head in, and oh! So he came around, he shook our hands, kissed us on the cheek, and then sat down with us and talked. He told us about his grandmother, and he's a quieter man. Biden is bubbly. He's just bubbly. And the next morning, we had breakfast at Biden's home with him. And it was the 1st of April. Now, Biden's wife is a professor at a college or something, and so he told this story that morning she was all ready to go to work, and she woke him up and says, You're late, the Roses are down there already. And he jumps out of bed and into the bathroom, and then back out, and then she says, April Fool.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So we sat there at the table having breakfast, and he had two aides, a tall one and a short one, and the short one came over and put a note on his lap, and he looked down and read it and says, "Oh, that's okay." And then finally the other one just points to him and then points to the door, and he says, "Oh, I've got to go to work." And the motorcade was outside waiting for him. He says, "My neighbors just hate it when I go to work in the morning." He says, "But you can just hang out here if you want to." And it's on the Naval Observatory property, so the aides took us up there, and then when we got back down, they said, "Well, if you don't have anything else to do, just hang out." So we wandered around the garden and the pool area, and that was the last time I got to see him, though. But he sent us to all the, like the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of this and that. And we had a whole week in D.C.
That's so cool.
Yeah. It just, and I thought, okay, we've done it. We've done it. We've been recognized. And then I got home and somebody asked me to call a 7th grade girl, and her history teacher had assigned them a project and to write about somebody they admired, and she chose Rosie the Riveter. And he said, "That is not acceptable because they're not real." And she said, "I know they are. I just saw them on TV." And she wrote about the Rosies, and he gave her a failing grade. And I talked to both of her parents, and they said they'd gone to the school and everything, and he wouldn't change the grade. And the father said, "But at least he won't be back next year." But that's when I thought, we're just starting. And so I went to Congressman Huffman's office and said, "We need a day on the calendar." And that started this crusade we're on now.
Well, I think Violet is going to come.
Yeah.
But that was really cool talking to you. You have an amazing life. It's really awesome.
Well, it's been a fun time. This has been really fun for me.
Hi, my name is Violet, and I'm also a 5th grader at Wade Thomas, and I have some questions. 1, what times in your life truly tested you, and what did you learn from them?
Well, I think probably every 7 years, supposedly all of your cells have changed, and that's a milestone. Something happens every time. There's no special age for dramatic things happening. I've just gone from one thing to another.
Okay. Well, what are you most proud of doing in life? What are you most proud of doing?
Right now, I'm most proud of the slow progress I'm making with the Congress. It is frustrating. It's like trying to walk in molasses. Back in 2000, I wrote a letter to President Clinton asking that the women workers of World War II be recognized by the government, because there's all kinds of recognition for the military, and yet they could not have won the war without the help of the women. It's either 16 million or 6 million women that joined the workforce and did every kind of a job possible. Every time a man was drafted into the military, a woman filled in his job. And yet there was nothing that said we were even there.
Oh.
So I contacted Congressman Huffman and said we needed a day on the calendar. after writing to Clinton in 2000 and then on down through the line, many letters to Obama, but no answer to any of them until I wrote to Biden, and he answered, and he invited us, and so finally I teamed up with May. She was doing the same thing on the East Coast, because she lives in Pennsylvania, that I was doing out here. She does more personal things because the population is more confined. She's 100 miles from New York City and 100 miles from DC. So she had access to many more people than I did. But we finally teamed up, and in 2017, we got a Rosie the Riveter Day.
And so I heard that, who was the person who gave you a response?
Joe Biden.
And how long did it take for him to give you a response?
Well, I wrote to him in May, and he didn't call until October.
Oh.
And so he needed something for a broadcast he was going to do, and so he picked up on it. But I had gotten really goofy in my letters, and I thought I got to do something to attract. And this is kind of an aside to it, but I wrote to the mayor of New York City last year, and I did get a phone call back from a guy in the mailroom, and he said, "I couldn't read your letter because it's written in cursive." End of that.
Wow.
So anyhow, we finally got the day for 1 year only.
Oh.
And then last year, they went back and 1 year only. And because of the shutdown, everything is out of kilter, but they're getting a bill ready to present again. And I called Huffman's office in DC and said, "What does the bill say?" And she says, "Well, it's for 1 year only." And I just flipped out. Oh, I'm ashamed of myself. I hung up on her. it just, I said, because we wanted it on a calendar. That would prove that we were something. And I said, no calendar company is going to put it on there for 1 year only. And so I called Huffman's office here in San Rafael and talked to the girl there and said if we couldn't have a national holiday, which I think we deserve, it had to be a flag flying day. So that's what they're working on now, and hopefully that'll happen.
Do you remember anything specific that you said in any of your letters?
Well, let's see. In the letter to Biden, I said my fantasy was to have my picture taken in the Oval Office. I got that.
That happened.
But he is a talker, even worse than I am. And when he got on the phone, and they took a picture of him calling me, and they wanted me to have somebody take a picture of me on my end of it. So I have that. But since then, we've corresponded. My daughter was my helper when we were there, and she took pictures of him, and a real good one. So I had all the Rosie sign it and sent it to him, and he wrote me back a letter. And
so, what 3 words would you say best describe who you tried to be in life and how you want to be remembered?
I remember when my son was in junior high school, and they were talking about careers. And he said, "I just can't make up my mind." And I said, "Don't worry about it. I haven't made up mine either." It just, as opportunities come along. I've never had what you call a career. I've done what had to be done at the time. My daughters and I lived in Bolinas for almost 20 years. And the only work there was just house cleaning and kids driving and grocery shopping for people. But I felt it was so important that I be home when they got home from school. And because other mothers worked, then we had a whole crowd of kids that came to our house. So I got through that and then got a job in Alaska at Denali National Park in the summers. And that was great. That was fun. And while I was in Bolinas, I built my own cabin.
Oh, wow.
And the county demanded it be torn down because it didn't have any utilities.
Oh.
So then I moved to Fairfax.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, what advice do you have for me as a young girl growing up today?
Don't get too serious about the future of your career, because you never know what the fork in the road is going to produce. I have a friend who was the sports editor of the Marin IJ, and because he was a senior and more money and stuff, he was laid off when they started redoing things, and he was just devastated. And then he got a job at Dominican College, and part of the perks for that were college educations for his two sons.
Oh.
So that's an example of never be afraid to take.
Chances.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm the last one. Okay, thank you.